Welcome back, bow hunters. This is Ron with Stay Sharp Guide, and today we're going to talk about sharpening the Magnus single bevel 150. And this is a budget friendly head, razor sharp. I think every manufacturer says that about their broadheads out of the package. We always test sharpness out of the package to see if that holds up. Stainless steel blades, and in this case we are going to be using our C kit. C for curved blades, concave or convex, so that's how the C got its name. So the first thing we always do is we check for sharpness and we look at it under the microscope. So let's look at a head right from the package. I'm going to adjust this a little bit. There we go. Alright, if you're not familiar with it, this is the Edge on Up sharpness meter. This is a best certified sharpness tester. It's got a little copolymer filament. It records the amount of grain force that it takes to push a sharp blade through that filament. So let's put their claim to the test here. .425, so that would not be hunt ready. If you look at this chart, my idea of hunt ready is 200 and less grams of force to push down. So again, this is a budget head. Got a great warranty. If you wreck it, they'll send you a new one. But let's talk about sharpening next. After we look at this under the microscope, we'll go through the sharpening regimen, and then we'll do all of these tests again under the microscope and through the sharpness meter to see if we can improve on that score of 426. When you get the C kit, it will come with the guide, which has 6 roller positions, allowing you to move each roller into the closest angular match for your bevel. It will come with 5 sheets of different grits: 240, 400, 800, 1200, 2500 grit. It'll come with a fine cut file. And it'll come with a round dowel and a square dowel. The round dowel is for concave, like Simmons heads that are hollow. And it also comes with a square dowel for convex edges. You want as much flat as you can working on here. What I do is I take the sandpaper and a scissors, and I will cut strips of the silicone carbide paper, pre-cut them, pre-tape one side. This happens to be 240 because that's where I'm going to start. And then I simply slide the dowel in. I've got one side taped. I can wrap the tape around the other side to secure that strip of silicone carbide paper to the dowel. Now what I've essentially achieved is a 240 grit stick or whetstone that I will use with this roller position. Now, after looking at it, it looks like this is the best roller position to match the factory angle. When you put the blade in, center it so you've got a high spot there, low spots on each side. Center that high spot in the middle of the roller. And when you sharpen, you will be going back and forth and sweeping from here to here as you're going in and out. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with 240 grit, and we're going to keep going until we get a burr, and then we're going to test for a burr. That is our signal to go to the next finer grit. So with the abrasive side down, lay it on the roller, and you can immediately start going over the edge. If you want to, you can simply do a pull stroke. I do a push and pull stroke. It's entirely up to you. If you push down hard, which you should not be doing, you can cut the silicone carbide paper. So to start out with, maybe you want to do just a pull stroke as you sweep along the edge. This is a roller, so you're not abrading the roller, you're just abrading the metal edge of the head as you're sweeping across it. But again, you can go front to back in a sawing motion. It's entirely up to you, whatever you feel the most comfortable with. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep going on this, and then I'll come back and we'll talk about the burr. Now that I've spent some time with 240 grit on the square dowel, we're going to check to see if we've got a burr on the back side. The burr always shows up on the opposite side of what you're sharpening. We were sharpening the bevel, so the burr should show up on the flat side. On a 240 grit burr, I can feel this with my thumbprint. As you get higher in the grits, it's going to be a little bit tougher. Take a piece of paper, cut it no more than 1/4 of an inch. This is probably 3/16 of an inch in width. And we're going to test along the edge to see if the paper hooks. See it popping? The paper's catching on that burr, and I'm going to inset a picture of what a burr looks like under magnification. At any rate, we've got a burr now at 240 grit on the back side. So we've sharpened the front side. We must get rid of that burr. So the easiest way to get rid of the 240 grit burr is with 240 grit paper. So we'll lay the blade flat on there and we'll give it a couple of swipes. Now it takes very little to get rid of that burr. The burr is very tiny, but we've created it with 240. So we're going to break it off with 240. Again, trap the blade flat and give it a couple strokes. If you want to pinch it while you're doing it, you certainly can. You're trying to keep the back side flat. A single bevel is perfectly flat on the back side. There should be no bevel on the back side whatsoever. Now, you're going to see abrasions on the back side as we do this. That's perfectly acceptable. That's what it's supposed to look like. We'll have a sharpen on this side, create a burr, break the burr off. The grit that we are using on this side, it will be used on this side. So we're going to go through all 5 grits, and by the time we get to 2500 grit, the back side will be polished with 2500 grit. So the next step is to take this piece of silicone carbide paper off of the 400 grit, and I've already pre-cut the next grit, which in this case happens to be 400. So we'll peel this right off. Here's our dowel. And all I'm doing is cutting pieces from the short length of the sandpaper. Sandpaper is long and has a short side. I cut this, and this is a piece about 3/4 of an inch wide. I cut it from the short direction. I pre-bend it around the dowel so I can lay it right in there. Slide it to the end. I can reuse this same piece of tape because I didn't mess it up too bad. We'll tape that right on there. Press it in place on the dowel. You don't want any of the tape hanging over. You want to be sharpening on the silicone carbide paper, not on tape. Then I set it down, press the dowel into it, and just wrap the tape around it. And that will trap this piece. Oh, I didn't do a very good job here. That will trap the silicone carbide paper onto the dowel. So now I've got a 400 grit whetstone that I will use in the same manner. I can simply drag it. I can go forward and backward. I'm always remaining in contact with the dowel and the blade. Those are the two contact points. So I'm going to go through, I did 240, now I'm going to do 400, then I'm going to do 800, then 12, and then finally 2500. And when I come back, we're going to talk about buffing the back side and the bevel side. Again, both sides of the piece of metal get the same treatment. So when I go to buffing that edge to a mirror finish, I'm also going to buff this side as part of burr breaking. So stay tuned. I will be back when we get to 2500 grit. So we're up to 2500 grit. We've gone through 240, 400, 800, 1200. This is 2500 grit. And as we do with every grit, we break off the burr. Now, as I've been doing this, I've been finding that it's actually a little bit easier with this stick to lay it flat on the back side. I seem to have a little bit more control over it when I can see what I'm doing. So I'm getting rid of the burr. And as I said, we are really polishing up the back side with the same amount of grit that we used on the front side. So you can see the difference between the factory finish and what we're doing. After I broke off the burr on the back side, especially at the final grit, I'm going to do it again. I'll be creating a very micro burr. And then I'm going to go back, break that burr off. I'll do this a couple of times. Any remnant of the burr left behind is going to test dull. I did several tests under the microscope where I knew there was some burr left, even at this high of a grit. And I tested the blade there next to an area where there was no burr. And the difference was remarkable. You want to make sure you get rid of 100% of the burr. So if that means chasing it a little bit on one side, then the other, back and forth, especially at the highest grits, certainly do that. You want to leave no grit behind, or no burr left on the blade. So I can tell you right now that we are producing a very sharp edge. So the last step in sharpening is the buffing step. So we've gone through all 5 grits. We can move them out of the way. The final grit is buffing, and there you won't use any of our silicone carbide paper. You'll simply just use the tape that you've been holding on the silicone carbide paper with. And now I've protected the wooden dowel from buffing compound. So the buffing compound that's included in your kit is a waxy crayon with a fine abrasive suspended in it. We'll get that on there. And then we will set about buffing this edge, or stropping, right? So we're creating a razor blade edge here. Let's really get rid of those micro serrations that were left by the last grit, 2500, and let's smooth them out. If you think about it, steel is sort of like clay. It seems harder than that, but it's not. And those tiny scratches we put in right now, we are smoothing that out like you'd be smoothing out clay. And you can already see it in the edge as I move this edge around. You can see the finish that we're getting. So again, use the square dowel with the buffing on the back side. Make sure you get rid of the buffing burr, and you will be buffing the back side of the blade as well as buffing the bevel. You want no burr left behind to impede your sharpness. And you can't overdo this. You can do this as much as you want. You're not removing much material. You're smoothing out the grooves left by 2500 grit. As I go through here, you can see the mirror finish on this blade reflecting back. And that will produce a very fine edge. I have no doubt this will look great under the microscope, and this will score well. So I'm going to do this for a while, and you can see how black this is turning. The black is the metal coming off the blade. It's a very tiny amount, but it's enough to color the green buffing compound to a black color. As you can see here, we're really polishing up both sides. So I'm going to stick at this for a little while, and then I'll come back with a close-up view of this edge under the microscope, and then we'll look at it in the sharpness tester. So stay tuned. So I do this to see if there's any burr left behind, and in this case I can find none hanging over. So this is a greatly improved edge. The first edge looked a little rough. Well, that edge certainly looked nice under the microscope. It is certainly a polished edge free of burrs, but pretty does not necessarily mean sharp, so let's test that out. "76. "76 is a fantastic score. So now you've shot this head through a target after you bought it and you've dulled it, or you've shot a deer or a bear or something and you've dulled it. Certainly it's a nice thick blade and not a disposable blade. It's worthy of resharpening. Now you know how to do that using the Stay Sharp C kit. Now the last thing that I did not touch on was the trailing bevel. The trailing bevel doesn't do any cutting going in, and if you're relying on this cutting as the deer ran off with the arrow still in it, and you're relying on it cutting on the way out of the animal, I contend you have already failed. So don't rely on that for cutting, but if you do indeed want to sharpen that, the same thing. Here you would be freehanding it, so you'd be putting all the same grits on and freehanding that little bit. I always get questions about the Tanto tip. A Tanto tip is a bone breaker, especially on a single bevel. It's to prevent two flats from arriving together and creating a flat here, which is curl prone on a heavy bone. So you'll see that there is a bevel on this side that runs into the bevel. Same thing on the other side. That too is a freehand operation. I don't necessarily concern myself with that being slicing sharp. You certainly can freehand that. This is the bone breaker. This is the plow on the front of your truck This is meant to prevent tip damage. This is not necessarily for slicing. All of your slicing happens through here. So if you do want to sharpen your Tanto tip or your trailing edge, you can do it while it's still in the guide and simply freehand those edges. Always remember to break off the burr when you do it. So there you go. That's the Magnus single bevel 150. Look at that edge, like a mirror. Sharpened with the Stay Sharp C kit. Thanks for watching.